still very creative parapsychological studies which have looked at the impact that distant intention can have on biological systems, most notably other people's physiology. I've just spent a week working with Dr. Schlitz, since I can verify all of the rumours that she's a very hard-working and very warm person to work with. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marilyn Schlitz.
Wasn't sure which rumors he was referring to. Well, thank you for coming. I know that it's difficult when there's other choices and very good speakers in the other rooms, and I guess that one solution would be for us to bifurcate, or maybe trifurcate in this case. All right, let's see. I have some slides, if we could just... Okay, so the topic that I'm going to deal with today is on intention and intuition, the implications of two specific areas of consciousness research for the area of healing. I think we know by now that this topic of consciousness is very complex. Like a fractal, it has multiple dimensions. It's very much dependent on your own perspective as to which angle you're going to take on the area of consciousness. I think this is one of the difficulties of the field, also one of the challenges of us trying to forge a unified science of consciousness. I think that it's interesting to note that we know very, very little about the nature of consciousness, even though we carry it around in our heads all the time. One of my favorite writers is Walker Percy. He noted, "Why is it possible to learn more in 10 minutes about the Crab Nebula in Taurus, which is 6,000 light years away, than you presently know about yourself, even though you've been stuck with yourself all your life?" It's a compelling question, and I think that as we move toward our understanding of consciousness, we may be able to get a better sense of who we are and what it means to be a human being. My own talk today is going to focus on one specific direction in the area of consciousness studies, namely that of healing. And then in particular, I'm going to focus on two areas of research that I have been involved in over the years, and to talk to you about the possible implications that these research directions have for our understanding of the possible mechanisms of healing. This slide might be a little hard to see, but essentially what I'm trying to get at here is that I think when we talk about healing, just as when we talk about consciousness, there are many different hooks or perspectives that one can take. And it really is something of a spectrum that folds back on itself, so that it's not a linear kind of all-encompassing overview, but rather these are some of the major areas that I think need to be taken into consideration when we talk about how it is that healers can successfully heal. I think that it encompasses everything from the social dimensions to our psychological component or awareness. Physical dimensions is obviously what people mostly think about when they think about healing. And then the possible non-local dimensions. And in fact, it's here in this right-hand aspect of the spectrum, which would probably be considered the left, if we want to speak in political terms, that I want to focus my attention today. But in order to create a context for understanding the research that I've been involved in, and in particular its potential application to healing, I want to go ahead and just briefly overview some of these other dimensions. Oops, going wrong way here. There we go. Healing is many things to many different people. Oftentimes it involves something social. It may be a social definition of what it means to be ill or well. For example, we have a lot of indications that there are culture-bound syndromes, illnesses that occur in one community and not in another. Susto and Pacho are some examples where you don't find these in the Western world. If you went to a Western-trained physician and you told them that you had been stricken with evil eye, he would probably think you're having delusions and that it isn't some physical abnormality that you're suffering from, but in fact something psychological. Another aspect of healing that people seem to forget about is the integration of the individual in society. So frequently what healers do when they're trying to bring about change in their patients is to better integrate them within the larger social matrix. This is an example from the Boudin pilgrimage in Haiti, where every year members of the community go off to a sacred mountain and join both with their community as well as within their environment. It's a way of establishing their place in a social order and their place within the natural environment. I keep doing this. This idea of social healing is also found in the Kalahari Desert with the Kung Bushmen. Here, the goal is to dance the community into well-being. So when a person is stricken with sickness, it's not only important for the individual, but for the whole of the society. These are nomadic, hunter-gatherer bands who are very much dependent on each individual member of the society, so that when any one person is not well or not integrated, the community comes together and they dance, and they dance, and they dance, and they dance for hours and hours and hours. And they achieve an altered state of consciousness that they can use and that they believe taps them into a transcendent awareness that can bring about what they call num, or boiling energy. So they achieve this altered state, they call it kia, and in this altered state they have what they call the num energy. And so it's a form of subtle energy, although it doesn't fit with any of the kinds of physical theories we might describe. Anyway, so they are able to use this altered state of consciousness and then the sweats, the num that they generate during this exercise to promote healing in their members of the community. I'm going to get this right here. It's through trial learning. Meditative states. Again, altered states of consciousness seem to be very conducive to this healing process, both in terms of the psychological well-being of the individual as well as within the society. People come together to meditate to preserve their social order. They also can use this kind of meditative state for non-local purposes. It's believed that meditation or prayer can bring about changes at a distance, non-locally. So this is an area that I think has empirical relevance as we move forward in trying to understand the mechanisms. Obviously, pharmacological agents. Stan Gross talked this morning about ways in which breathing or hallucinogenic substances can be used to induce an altered state of consciousness that has the ability to integrate, body, mind, and spirit. There are a variety of different cultures that use different pharmacological agents. This is a New Guinea wig man, and he's getting ready, you see him preparing his magic potion there, to engage in a very sacred ritual that will go on for many hours. Again, now, thinking about this relationship between now physical and psychological, we find that in many cultures there are different kinds of physical manipulation. This is an example of acupuncture. And we now, within the Western framework, have a model for attempting to understand how acupuncture could be successful as an analgesic, for example. We believe that there is evidence. Bruce Pomerantz, a physician at the University of Toronto, has done some pioneering work looking at the relationship between endorphins and acupuncture. The idea being that with the stimulation of these meridian points, that people are stimulating endorphins, which are then stimulating some kind of pain-relieving benefit to the person. There's a whole area that links body, mind, and spirit, which has been called psychoneuroimmunology. And here the interest is in looking at different cognitive and behavioral strategies that may be able to have objectively measurable changes or impacts on the body. For example, here we have two kids that are playing what's called the natural killer cell game. The idea is that if you can get somebody engaged psychologically, yes?
I wonder if you would mind speaking into the microphone. I can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Okay, is this better?
Hey, the microphone's not free.
I think so.
Yeah, you are hooked up.
You can be heard fine back here. You're front of the audience. Use the front speaker.
Well, basically here, the interest is in looking at, it's a fairly reductionistic approach to looking at the relationship between mind and body. And the idea being that if you can get someone engaged in some kind of visualization task, that this may in fact have objectively measurable impacts on the body's immune system. Now, this is a very controversial area of research, and many people think that it's well established, but in fact I've talked to some of the leading experts, George Solomon and Robert Ader, for example, and there's clear indication that stress has a detrimental effect on the immune system. But there is very little clear-cut evidence that these things like positive emotions, laughter, visualization, will have a beneficial effect on the immune system. So this is something that at a street level, most people feel that our emotions and our attitudes will have some impact on our body. But from the laboratory, the results are not as clear-cut as we'd like them to be. And it's a challenge in an area that I think more research needs to be done on. At the Institute of Noetic Sciences, my predecessor, Dr. Brendan O'Regan, was interested in looking at the possibility that there are relationships between body, mind, and spirit that may account for cases of spontaneous remission. So, for example, if you go to the Lourdes Center, there's the belief that people can bathe in the healing waters and come away cured, or people who go into temples or churches and somehow, through non-medical means, have been able to experience some kind of remission. There are a variety of biological markers that suggest that things are happening, such as fever, which may induce a change that leads to healing on the part of cancer patients, for example. But there are also a lot of indications that, again, turning to the area of psychoneuroimmunology, that people's psychological state may have a profound impact on their ability to heal. And it also may tie in with their connection. So if you look at somebody like David Spiegel's work at Stanford University, he's been doing clinical studies with women who have breast cancer. And he brings them into a social support group, and he asks them to talk to each other about their disease. Just talking to each other over short periods of time has doubled the life expectancy of the treated group compared to the average population of women with breast cancer. So they then did a follow-up study to look at what's happening in this social interaction. And many of the women who are experiencing this, fatal disease are finding some connection to a spiritual essence, both in terms of their own self and their position in their society, as well as some profound sense of interconnectedness. So we are now initiating a research project at the California Pacific Medical Center in which we're trying to parse apart the difference between these social, psychological, and spiritual dimensions and to see if there are specific ways in which we can facilitate healing through these kinds of techniques. All right, I'm back to my spectrum of healing, and I'm going to now focus in on this area over here to the right under non-local dimensions. So we've talked about different ways that social situations may be important, psychological factors, physical factors. Now let's see if there is some way that there are non-local effects that may have physically demonstrable evidence of their potency in terms of healing. So down below I've got psi and spiritual, and under psi I've got active and receptive. So what I mean here is that in the area of parapsychology, we've been interested in looking at sort of two kinds of phenomena. One is this active or psychokinetic possible influence. And this is an area that I've done extensive research on, and I'll talk to you about in some detail. The other area we call extrasensory perception, a more passive modality. So this may be useful in the context of diagnostic work. And again, I'll talk to you about some of the research that's been done here. Okay. Larry Dossey, who many of you probably know, has been talking about different eras in medicine. Larry's a bit of an optimist, so I'm not sure that we are quite as far along as sometimes he would like to think. But we went through era 1 medicine, where the body was seen as a machine, and it could be manipulated from an objective point of view. And I think that little by little, people within the medical model have begun to see that it's not quite so simple. We have indications from placebo work, for example, that the attitude and the relationship between the healer and the healee are vitally important for the efficacy of a particular drug. Well, this is interesting. You can give the same drug to two different people, and it has a different impact. You can have two different physicians give the same drug to the same person, and it has a different impact. You do clinical tests, and you find that the drug is very consistent the dosage is consistent, yet there's something about this relationship between the healer and the healee that I think is becoming much more acceptable now. Although, as I said, this area of psychoneuroimmunology and psychoendocrinology is still controversial, and there's still a lot for us to learn. This era 3 dimension that Larry talks about is where we start getting into non-local effects. So is it possible that if you look at claims of cross-cultural healers, for example, they make an argument that they can heal, some of them, not all of them, that they can heal from a distance. In fact, without the patient even knowing that they're the object of the healer's intention. Well, this is quite interesting. Most anthropologists who go into the field, document that these are belief systems, but never do anything to follow up on the validity of these kinds of claims. So we were thinking that maybe this is a topic that we could take into a laboratory setting, create sort of a model of healing to begin to look at it, and then ultimately some of our research is leading us into a clinical situation. I'll start first by talking about some of the work we've done in the lab that is looking at a model or a paradigm for beginning to understand this non-local dimension of healing. This is what we're calling DMILS, or distant mental interactions with living systems. It's an area that we have changed the name as often as the days change, and so this happens to be the key terminology for the day. This is, again, sort of my urging us to keep an open mind about the data I'm about to present you. This is an anthropologist sitting in his hut with one of his colleagues over to the right who looks like a boar. He is a boar. And the boar is telling his colleague, I learned one thing from the experience. Never call a witch doctor a clever illusionist. These are the kinds of data, these are the kinds of experiences that people make all over the world. Indeed, the only place that they're not widely accepted is within the Western world. And I think that it's time for us to consider that they're a valid area for scientific investigation. There have been some reviews of the literature looking at the possibility that one can measure some kind of non-local exchange of information or some kind of energetic exchange between two living systems. Frequently it involves a person trying to influence a plant or some kind of microorganism. The studies I'm going to talk about involve manipulation of human physiology. So altogether, there have been over 150 studies that have been published. So this isn't an area that has received no attention. It's just received relatively little attention in terms of a rigorous and systematic research program. Of those studies that have been published, approximately half have reported some level of significance. In other words, in the literature, in these reviews of the literature, it appears that there is some kind of anomaly happening and that there is some replicability in this effect that people are reporting. So let me talk specifically about one research paradigm that I was involved with for, I guess it's been about 15 years now. I've been working with a colleague, William Broad, who at the time we were both at the Mind Science Foundation in San Antonio, Texas. And what we asked people to do is come into the lab, and we were measuring their autonomic nervous system activity. So essentially, we were looking at unconscious reactions, physiological reactions, on the part of unselected participants. So this isn't, at this point, actually clinical studies working with sick people. So what we asked them to come in is to sit in a quiet room and just to sit still for about 20 minutes. Meanwhile, this is William's back, we had the physiological activity of the first person sent to a chart recorder and a computer in a distant room so that you might know about research in biofeedback, where you attempt to influence your own autonomic system, to relax your autonomic system by getting feedback and in training yourself to be able to calm yourself in a systematic way. Well, in this case, it might be considered allobiofeedback, from the point of view that William, in this case, is getting feedback about the distant person's physiology and then attempting to either calm or activate it in a random sequence. All right, so the way the project is designed is that we have a 20-minute, or the time intervals vary, but I'll just say 20 minutes for right now. And that 20-minute period is divided into 30-second sampling epochs. So that what's happening is that the experimenter or the healer or the psychic is attempting to influence the other person on a random schedule. So for 30 seconds they attempt to calm the person. For 30 seconds they do nothing. And the way the experiment was designed is that we used an ABBA design, such that if there's a natural habituation across the session, which you might expect to happen as the person gets more relaxed, their autonomic activity becomes more relaxed, and if what we were measuring was a change from beginning to end of the session, you would expect some kind of artifactual difference. What we tried to do was counterbalance that habituation, so that half of the sessions were influence periods and half of them were control periods. It's counterbalanced and within subject, so that you could then look at the average amount of autonomic activity in these two different conditions across the session and then across people within the experiment. I hope that's clear. Okay. So we did, in this case, this diagram reports 13. We've had 14. This reports the summary of experiments that we did using this particular procedure, and what we were measuring again is a difference score between the influence periods and the control periods, where the person who's being influenced is completely blind as to the random sequence of events, has no idea the length of time they're being influenced or the sequence in which the person is intending to influence their physiology. And what we found was that in all but one case, the results were in the predicted direction. In all but one case, the magnitude of the effect was fairly robust, such that we believe if we summarize doing a meta-analysis across these experiments, the results produced a highly statistically significant effect. In other words, it appears to us, using this double-blind experimental condition, that it's possible for one person to influence the physiology of another person, even at a distance and under completely blind conditions.
Could you just read off the legend on that chart before you move on?
Yeah, what we're measuring here, the two differences, this says excessive electrodermal biodecay experiments, and what we've got, the white bars are effect size, the colored bars are the z-scores. Okay. All right, so what we've got essentially, this slide represents a summary qualitatively of our observations. We found that about half of the studies yielded statistically significant results. And then again, as I say, a concatenation of the trials across the experiment, as well as the experiments across the series, yielded statistically significant evidence that there was a difference. And this difference was about 10 to the minus fourth, so it's not a trivial effect we're talking about. While statistically significant, it doesn't always occur. So there are many things about this intentionality effect that we have yet to understand, but that it does seem robust enough that we are certainly comparable to the area of psychoneuroimmunology, if not slightly better, in terms of our replication rate. The magnitude of the effect was actually comparable to self-regulation. So in other words, we invited people to come in and do biofeedback, to actually try to regulate their own physiology, and then to compare the effects of this distant influence in relation to the self-regulation. And they were not statistically different. So I found that pretty interesting. People doing biofeedback have more control, but again, it wasn't a statistically significant difference. The people we worked with are not randomly selected from the population, they're self-selected, so it's hard to make generalizations about everybody in the world. But it appears that the effect is fairly widely distributed in the population. We worked with people who were gifted psychics. We worked with people who were ostensibly gifted healers. And we worked with the experimenters. William and I did a lot of these sessions ourselves. And then we worked with unselected people who come into the laboratory. And we found that our results as the experimenters were basically comparable to what we had found using these gifted psychics. Matthew Manning is one of the people, for example, that we worked with. And this makes some sense. We were statistically better at producing this kind of effect than a randomly selected population or a self-selected but not particularly psychic population, not particularly gifted in terms of their self-report.
Did it still sometimes not happen even with the better?
Yes, it doesn't always happen by a long shot, and I'm not making any claims to the contrary. This is something that's fairly ephemeral. However, if you start looking at a lot of areas of psychology, you find that psychologists rarely replicate, and when they do, the replication rate is really not as good as we might hope. And in fact, our replication rate seems comparable in many cases. You look at, for example, the experiment or expectancy effect, and this kind of replication rate is comparable to that. We haven't done anything systematically with distance. In fact, this is one of the projects that I'm interested in exploring, and I'll talk about that in a little while in terms of where this research is leading. We've not seen any negative side effects, but I do have to say that I think this is an area of some ethical consequence. You know, we get phone calls from people who say that somebody is trying to influence their physiology from a distance or trying to control their thoughts from a distance. And so we did a series of experiments that attempted to look at whether the effect can be blocked. In other words, can people shield themselves from this kind of distant intentionality effect? We haven't done a lot on this topic, but the data that we do have suggests that people are able to create some kind of resistance to the influence. Again, this is an area that needs more work, and I especially think as we begin to try and think of this for a clinical application, it's very important that we begin to understand, you know, how people can turn the effect off as well as turning it on. Okay, so I mentioned about the blocking effect. It makes sense about the blocking, though, because if this is a very subtle sensory or non-sensory process, it occurred to us that as people are open and attempt to be responsive to this kind of influence, that we stand a better chance of actually noticing some kind of effect. All right, this led to another series of experiments that we're calling remote observation or remote staring studies. Again, this work has some history. Some of the work was done at the Mind Science Foundation. William Broad initiated some of the work with Barry Andrews and Donna Schaefer. I then went to work in a cognitive sciences laboratory at a large multinational corporation called Science Applications International Corporation. I also had a joint appointment at Stanford in the psychology department. So using these two sets of resources, we set up two experiments where we were attempting, again, to look at the possibility that someone can be influenced by a distant person's intentionality. This experiment, I think, has great street validity from the point of view that many, many people believe they've had the experience of someone staring at them. They're driving in their car, and they get this sense that somebody's looking at them. They look over, and lo and behold, somebody's gazing at them. Or they're sitting in a park. There's a man sitting in a park, and he notices a good-looking woman. He wants to get her attention, so he stares at her. I mean, it's very, very widely distributed in the population that people believe they have this capacity. I was very interested when I was doing the study at the Stanford population, the undergrads that I was working with. A lot of them had tried it as kids when they were like in elementary school. They would design these little experiments to see if they could get somebody's attention from a distance. So it's something that, you know, it's certainly not an original idea, but it's something that we attempted to move into a more sophisticated kind of procedure. So what we did is to ask the question, when somebody gets the sense that someone's staring at them, and they're right, is it because they are sensing it through some keen peripheral vision that they're not consciously aware of, but in fact some slight movement? We know that the perception of movement is very, very old in terms of brain development. So is it possible that what they're doing is just having some heightened sense of, you know, it's a motion detector? Or is it possible that there is some impact of consciousness or intentionality on the physical, on the autonomic nervous system of the distant person? So what we did is we brought in volunteers, and again, we monitored their autonomic nervous system. We had a video camera that pointed at them, and in this case, what we did is to provide them with some visual stimuli through a videotape. So in the meantime, we've got a person. This is a colleague, Larissa Vilenskaya. Some of you may know her. She's a Soviet researcher, and she was in one room while Christina, my research assistant, was in another room. I set this up, and Christina told me I couldn't show her picture, so I thought I'd do it indirectly. So the idea here is that half of the period, Larissa stares at the image of Christina via closed-circuit television. And half of the period, the screen goes blank and there's no intentionality. She's instructed to shift her attention to a book that she's reading or something that she's writing, just not to focus on the person in the distant room. Again, the procedure was set up such that we had random sampling periods, and we again counterbalanced the design so that we had equal numbers of staring and non-staring. We had equal numbers of staring periods at the end of the session as compared to the beginning of the session. That it was counterbalanced across the entire population of people we worked with. And the assessment, in terms of the statistics, was done by somebody who wasn't aware of the direction of the effect in any particular session. So the results can't be due to some kind of checker bias, for example. All right. So what we found was that during those periods where the person is staring at the distant person's image, we found that their autonomic activity was significantly greater than during the control period. So this was actually what I predicted to have happen. In Williams' studies, he found that in some cases it calmed people, in some cases it activated them. We decided we wanted to be very directional about the effect, and we actually instructed people to try and focus their attention in such a way that they could wake the person up or really get their attention. And again, overall, the results were statistically significant. Each of the two experiments involved 24 sessions, 24 subjects, and this is a combined graph and with an N of 48. Okay, so this is just a bar graph that depicts the difference in magnitude in these two sets of conditions. Using a statistic, you find that these results are quite different, and I think visually you can just see that there are many more cases where the person is activated than calm. Okay, I'm going to shift gears here. So that's a summary of some of the intentionality work, or the effects of psi in terms of it being an active process. Now let's talk about it as a potentially passive process. A number of studies have been done looking at the possibility of extrasensory perception. And the idea that there is ability for people to gain information across a long distance and without any possible sensory exchange of information between the two people. I'm going to talk about one specific study and then incorporate that into a larger body of data. This particular study was done at the Juilliard School. It involved what we call the Ganzfeld technique. And the work was conducted with my colleague, Charles Honorton, who unfortunately died a few years ago now, so he's not able to be here to talk about this work himself. The idea of these experiments is that you have a person, a sender, in one room who's watching a video clip or a picture of some kind, a static target or a dynamic target. Meanwhile, you have a receiver in a distant room, electrically shielded room, who is blind as to the picture that the distant person is looking at. The person, the receiver, is sitting there generating imagery. This Ganzfeld technique is very interesting. It was developed at the turn of the century by people interested in introspective psychology because it was conducive to imagery. You sit, you put these half ping pong balls over a person's eyes, you shine red light on top of their face, and within about a minute, the red field turns black, and people start seeing things. So the idea was that this is sort of a simulated hypnagogic state, close to the dream experience, not quite. Again, it's an altered state. The work was designed with sort of two factors stimulating it. One was that people who have these kind of ESP experiences are frequently in some kind of altered state of consciousness. And secondly, that imagery does seem to be a conducive vehicle by which these kinds of images are mediated into conscious awareness. All right, overall, the Ganzfeld, I think I'm a little out of order here. 28 studies were conducted in the area of the Ganzfeld, and where you would expect 25% right by chance, the observed effect using this auto-Ganzfeld procedure was 35%. So in other words, what was happening is, let me just do the next part of this. There's one slide missing. But, the idea is that the person in the sender is watching a video clip. After the session is over, they're shown the correct video clip and 3 decoys, so that they don't know which one is the correct one, and they can then convert their qualitative mentation, their imagery, into a number. So they choose which one most matches their imagery, second, third, and fourth, okay? So that the probability of a hit, them getting the correct target, is 1 in 4. And in this case, then, people were able to correctly identify the results 35% of the time instead of 25% of the time. Overall, combined across these studies, the results suggest that there is some kind of anomalous information transfer taking place between the 2 people. When we did this study with Juilliard students, Juilliard is a world-renowned conservatory in New York, specializing in music, dance, and drama. We worked with these students and we found a 50% success rate in that particular study, such that this creative population appeared to be at least equal, if not better, than the average population in producing these kinds of results. This is just an example from one of the mentation reports. The target was a picture of Santa holding a bottle of Coca-Cola with a large billboard of Coca-Cola behind him. So the features of the target, Santa holding the Coke, the large sign behind him, the person in the gun felt completely blind as to the nature of the target. Described a man with a beard, looks like Robin Hood, he's wearing a hat, he has a sack over his shoulder, there's a billboard that says Coca-Cola on it, and there's a man with a white beard. If this person had no problem discriminating between the 3 decoys and the correct target. Okay, so why am I talking about this in the context of a lecture on healing? And the reason is that I think this kind of receptive information at a non-sensory level, within a well-controlled laboratory setting, has direct bearing on our attempts to understand the claims of people who report doing intuitive diagnosis. So that many, many people claim that they're able to somehow scan the body of a distant person. Oftentimes they'll scan the body when the person's right there, but frequently all they need is the name of a person or some way to target a specific individual. Frequently the name is sealed in an envelope so that they don't even know for sure who it is. But the idea here is that if in fact that could be shown to be a reliable means of information transfer, again, this has implications for our understanding of treatment and diagnosis in the area of healthcare. The current techniques that we use, the advanced technologies that we have through PET or a variety of different other imaging capacities are very, very costly. And as we begin to look at our crisis in healthcare, I think that we are looking for effective alternatives. And again, we're looking for ways that we can begin to test, actually objectively validate or dispute the claims of intuitive diagnosis practitioners. Daniel Benor is a physician who many of you may know. He did a review of the literature, and unfortunately he noted that intuitive diagnosis has received less attention than healing, and that this neglected modality has much to offer modern medicine. Indeed, based on our review of the literature, we found no good studies of intuitive diagnosis. It was very disappointing. Norman Shealy, some of you may know, has been doing some clinical work, but none of this is well controlled, none of it's done under double-blind conditions. And it's something that, again, offers great promise for our understanding of the overall program of healing. We do have one project that we've just funded at the Institute of Noetic Sciences that is an attempt to rectify the situation and at least start us in our efforts to look at psychic diagnosis from a rigorous and scientific point of view. And that is that we have a researcher, his name is Larry Burke. He's a radiologist at Duke University, and he's very interested in the possibility that this intuitive diagnostic procedure could be an adjunct to his clinical practice. So he's designed a very nice study working with a number of intuitives, and then he has a number of patients develop a specific design so that he has strong statistical power. And so this is an area of research that we're interested in conducting. All right, this diagram is actually my attempt to depict some of the areas of research that are going on at the Institute of Noetic Sciences that are a follow-up of this work and an extension. So we have an ongoing program that is looking at consciousness studies, and particularly the role of intentionality in spiritual and transpersonal healing. We divided the research program into 12 modules. This is actually year one. We've just initiated a funding drive to promote this area of research. And we divided it into a number of different sort of components of the intentionality problem. And our reach is very broad. We're interested in the work I just described involving distant intentionality. So this is one component. We're interested in emerging worldviews. Willis Harman talked about the need for a new epistemology. Well, if we can show that these kind of consciousness effects are actually causal in the physical world, this has profound consequence for our understanding of the nature of reality and the nature of our place in that social order. So one of the areas that we're concerned with is looking at the impact that these kinds of data might have once they've been well established, once we promoted them within the mainstream literature. Under emerging worldviews, we also have recently supported a project that is looking at changing paradigms in medicine so that there is a move from, there's a growing body of physicians who have become disenchanted with the biomedical model and are now interested in looking at a more holistic or alternative approach to healing. And so we have two anthropologists that are actually looking at the impact that this change is having both on the individual and their personal transformation, as well as the impact that it's going to have on the broader healthcare system as we know it. Let's see. We have a project that's underway now in Ethiopia where the researcher is looking at the effects of long-term meditation on longevity. So that you find reported in the community people who have done these intensive meditation practices and who report living to be 140, 150 years old. Well, the first problem is that the birth records are exceedingly unreliable. So he has come up with a procedure. He's at MIT now. He's got a whole team of researchers working with him, and he's come up with a procedure that allows him to date, based on a little scraping of the teeth, their exact age. It's a fairly reliable measure, and it's something that then his goal is to couple that with some biomedical, biochemical kinds of assays. He believes that serotonin, for example, serotonin is produced primarily during sleep, and he thinks that this deep meditation state may be a sleep-like state that's promoting an enhanced amount of serotonin and potentially is maybe an aspect of what's happening in terms of promoting long-term survival. So this is another area where we think that altered state and Western science can be merged in such a way that we can begin to see some physical effects. Let's see. We're interested in placebo research, not from the traditional point of view, but rather from the point of view that you can actually manipulate the expectations of the healer rather than of the patient, and to see if, in fact, the intention of the researcher or the physician will make a difference in terms of the outcome of the treatment. We've done a number of projects looking at the possible survival of consciousness. We're working with Ian Stevenson, for example, who's trying to chronicle cases where there is some biological marker that may indicate an evidence of reincarnation. Very complicated area to do research in, and I think that if anybody is doing a responsible job, it's Ian Stevenson. It's something that, again, has profound consequences, both for our understanding of the nature of self, as well as of the nature of consciousness and its potential role in the physical world. We have a number of projects that are looking at the possibility that prayer or intentionality may be causal. This is something that Larry Dossey has written about in his book on healing words, and we're now interested in looking at it within a clinical situation. So that we have a physician, Dr. Bentwich in Israel, who's looking at the possibility that a group of meditators and prayers in a distant part of the city are able to actually aid the recovery time of people undergoing surgery. He's done one study and found nice significant differences between a control group who received no distant intentionality and a treated group. And now what he's trying to do is increase the sample size, increase the statistical power, and actually look at the study again to see if he can replicate that. So I think that, we have a number of projects that under subtle energies, for example, we have a study that is very close to my heart, where we're interested in looking at the possibility that Qigong masters can actually change genetic expression in cells that have been grown to lead to brain tumors. So this is a project we're working with a molecular geneticist at California Pacific Medical Center who has done years and years of research on this particular cell culture and is interested in the possibility that there is some kind of subtle energy or information exchange to happen when Qigong masters or other kinds of healers actually sort of turn on their stuff, whatever that stuff is. And combined with the attempt to measure the objective changes in the genetic material, we're also interested in the phenomenology and the social context by which these exchanges take place. So what's happening in the Qigong master that's leading them to believe, or in fact possibly to actually produce changes in the physical world through nothing other than their intentionality? So this is just an example of some of the areas that I see as promising if we in fact take seriously the possibility that consciousness and in particular intentionality may be potent and demonstratively measurable in a scientific framework. And then talking a little bit about the implications. This is a cartoon that says, on the board it says, there's a nice little formula there, and it says, because that's the way it is. And underneath it says, if only it were that simple. I put this slide up because people frequently, the most obvious question is, what is the theory that goes behind this? How is this stuff possible? How is it that one person's intentions could actually influence somebody from a distance? The answer is I don't have a clue. And that's both frustrating and exciting because there is great possibility for us making advances. There are some areas where one might become speculative. I think that Stuart Hameroff's work this morning is intriguing. Some way of combining a quantum mechanical model with nonlinear dynamics may lead us to understand how the signal, a very tiny perturbation in a complex system, could actually have sort of macro level effects. But it's purely speculation. There are a number of very smart people working on the question. My hope is that as we begin to do more empirical research, that it will stimulate people to think that this is a useful area to engage in, both in terms of theory building as well as in their own laboratories and clinical situations. Let's see, I think we need to pull the slide back a little bit. Lewis last night talked about the need for a new epistemology. If, in fact, consciousness is something causal, it goes against everything that we are taught about the nature of our place in an objective world. And indeed, it calls into question the whole enterprise of the way in which we do science. So that we assume that an experimenter or a physician who's working with a population, particularly when we're starting to talk about microorganisms or cells, but if we're talking about humans that are detached sensorially so that there's no subtle communication going on between the two people, we assume objectivity. We somehow manipulate the external world and it responds the way the external world responds. And that has nothing to do with our own intention or our own belief or our own motivation. But in fact, these data suggest that that's not the case. And that in fact, we as practitioners may in fact be able to cause changes based on our own goals and intentions. This cartoon represents sort of the classic paradigm. Here's the researcher, the genie comes out of his test tube, and he says, "Go away, you fool, you just ruined my experiment." I've been working with Richard. He mentioned that I've been in his lab for the past week, and we'll come again to do some more work. But Richard and I have both done some of this theory work that I described, and we've come up with very different results. So as I said, it doesn't always replicate. Not everybody is able to get these kind of effects. So Richard's results have been pretty chancy. Mine have been more suggestive. And so what we wanted to do is actually take that difference and address it head on. So is there some possible experimenter effect that's going on here that could lead to conclusions about the way in which the data, the interpretations of the data. In this case, we're working under conditions that Richard, who sees himself as a skeptic, has carefully controlled, and we just had an experience. We did 2 pilot studies the other day for an NBC film crew who had come into the lab, and we told them we're interested in this experimenter effect, and I'm the good guy, he's the bad guy, this is the way it's set up. And lo and behold, we did 2 sessions, and the experiment that I ran found a very big difference in the autonomic activity of the 2 people. The experiment he ran couldn't have been closer to chance. So it was a lovely example, and the fact that it's worked for national television. Now, we're not going to conclude anything from that. Very preliminary. You obviously don't write home with great enthusiasm until you've collected more data. But it did suggest to us that we may be onto something, that this is a fruitful area for us to do more research in, and that in fact, rather than trying to avoid it, we might go ahead on and look at it. And if anybody's interested, we're interested in replicating a study that was done by Fisk and West some years ago, where we're looking at it's an experimenter effect study using ESP cards. And so we have some cards here. we'd like to do 20 runs, or 40 runs, 20 people. And so if anybody's interested, please see either me or Richard later. End of plug. Okay, so what do we do with this stuff in terms of science as we know it? Personally, I'm a big fan of science, and I think that while it isn't complete, and while it doesn't tell us everything, I'm also a fan of literature and the arts. I also think that it's a big challenge to see how far we can push the existing methodologies and theories in such a way that they can incorporate these kinds of phenomena. Okay, so that I think, challenge number 1 is to take the existing paradigm and push it as far as we can in such a way that it becomes accountable for these data. Challenge number 2 is, and I think it's more serious, is to develop more appropriate methodologies for beginning to understand consciousness. Like I said, we come from various perspectives on consciousness. I think that probably rather than pushing for a new epistemology, what we're seeking is new epistemologies, a respect and a tolerance for diversity, and a recognition that because consciousness is something multifaceted, that in fact we need multiple approaches. And that together, with some kind of collaborative effort, we may begin to shed light on the nature of this ephemeral property or process. In terms of the implications at a social level, I think that if in fact these data hold up, and if in fact it is true that one person can influence another person at a distance, or one person can gain information about another person's thought from a distance, that this really puts into question the idea that we are self-contained, separate individuals. So that, we hear the old cliche about, you've got to be responsible for your actions. These data suggest you also have to be responsible for your thoughts. And that, we see in many cultures this idea of pointing the bone or wishing malice on a person, the little voodoo dolls, things like that. I mean, it may well be that we are interconnected at a level that requires that we open ourselves to each other and we become more clear about what our intentions and our goals are in terms of our interactions. Okay, in closing, I want to go back to a quote from Walker Percy. One of my favorite letters. The search is what anyone would undertake if he were not stuck in the everydayness of his own life. To become aware of the possibility of the search is to be onto something. Not to be onto something is to be in despair. So basically that's it. I think that much more work needs to be done. I think that by situating these areas of consciousness studies within a larger framework like healing, where we can see the practical applications, it gives it social relevance and allows us to merge with a variety of other different types of researchers who are interested in similar kinds of questions or who have expertise that could help us to get a better picture of the whole story. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Marilyn, for a very thought-provoking talk. We have a little while for questions. So, okay, maybe up there.
Thank you, Sheila Davis. I want to thank you for a very exciting presentation, first of all. I wondered if you had done and he worked with people tested by the Myers-Briggs, the Jungian type instrument. Last year at Tucson 1, which I attended, there was a poster presentation that suggested that it worked with people very high with ESP talent. And the finding was that the highest percentage of the 16 types to be gifted in ESP were the ENFPs, extroverted, intuitive, feeling perceptives. Each of those dimensions has been connected to the right hemisphere. And I wondered if in your work looking for intuitive types, if you might have used the MBTI that way.
Yeah, in the Juilliard studies that we talked about, that met the what do we call this, automated Donstall procedure. Chuck Arrington was very interested in the MBTI, and I think he may have been the person who introduced it to the field. I don't know. Yes, he found some correlations. These are not, 100% predictable, just like the rest of it. I think that pattern does seem to hold up to a certain extent. But again, we tried it with the Juilliard population, and it didn't particularly show a strong effect with that profile. But it does seem to be a fairly interesting measure. I'm an anthropologist by training. I'm much more interested in context and in qualitative. So I tend to shy away a lot from standardized assessments, although I do think that they have great utility, particularly if you have a large enough sample.
Okay. Martha?
Thank you, Marla. It was really wonderful. As an anthropologist, and from the images you used, it was clear that many of the cultures for whom these are also just factual part of their lives, those aspects of ESP, remote viewing, healing at a distance, and so forth, take place very much within a religious and social culture, which means that there are certain values that culture embraces. One of the things which would concern me, for example, is to take, as we often do in the West, something of that character out of the culture, leaving the values, the spiritual understanding, the religious sentiments, and so forth to the side, and use this basically as a technique or technology, which oftentimes, at least I know some of the early work in this was funded, for example, by defense departments or secret government agencies, both in the United States and abroad. And basically, what is to guarantee this as a moral force as opposed to essentially a demonic force? You talk about healing, but there's the flip side. And how is it that you put this back in a context, to use the word that you ended with?
Thank you. That's a good question. Well, there are several sort of ways to address that question. One is that it is frequently used within a context that, clearly is culturally embedded. Whether or not it's used in sacred context is not always clear. Although in many indigenous societies, you know that there is no sharp dichotomy. Everything is sacred, the relationship. So you go out to do the hunt, and the person does the divination prior to the hunt to look to see where they're going to go to find the animals. So there is a sacred component to that. And I do agree, in terms of the origin of the bio-PK research, we actually have a field study that's underway right now. Larissa Villen-Sky is doing it. She's looking at the ancient root of this distant intentionality effect through Siberian shamanism. And so she's looking at the tradition and then the effects of that tradition on the development of laboratory research in the former Soviet Union, and then are picking that work up in America. And very clearly, the primary source of funding for this work has been defense departments, both the Soviet Union and the United States. I think it's a serious problem. My way around it, personally, is to maintain as sort of pure and positive an orientation as possible. My more pragmatic approach to the question is that I think this blocking work is important. I think that as people begin to understand ways that they can protect and preserve themselves, that this might be a way in which we can start to ethically, continue to do the research, knowing that people are doing the research, and knowing that the Defense Department is interested. I think somebody in the free world needs to be out there doing it, and they need to be doing it with the intentionality of not non-lethal weaponry, but healing. You know, I mean, that's really where my values lie in the whole thing. So I think that, you know, at a realistic level, the stuff's going to happen. It's in some ways it's an imperative, I think, that we continue to do it in an open forum where somebody can get up and talk about it. I think that we need, as researchers, because I do believe in this entanglement, I don't think that I am detached. And I do think my intentionality is going to come to play a role in the process. And I also think that if we can develop procedures that will allow people to start understanding ways that they can preserve their own integrity, that will be helpful too. And finally, there's just an article that's going to come out in the next Noetics Review by Rachel Remen, in which, I didn't particularly like the article much, but in which she talks about, and the reason I didn't like it is because I just don't know that I completely agree with it, in the point of view that is Psi sacred is the name of the piece. And she's arguing that Psi by itself is not necessarily sacred, and that if you look at the different spiritual traditions, some of them warn us away from it, some of them encourage us to develop it as another facet of our human potential. But, you know, my way around that is that I think we need to bring that level of the spiritual into all the things we do. You know, the integrity of what we do, whether we call it spiritual, whatever label we put on it. I mean, this is a church and I'm not preaching. I think that it's important that we bring integrity to what we do, and if we can begin to understand some of the ways in which the culture promotes and guides the use of these things, you know, then we're doing a service. It's a hard question.
Thank you, Marilyn. My name is Kirk McNulty. I just had a thought as you were describing the experiment.
I knew that.
Pardon? Which you believe, and your colleague doesn't. And the thought that crossed my mind was, if you believe in it and get positive results, and he doesn't believe in it and gets negative results, and consciousness be causal, how can it be otherwise?
Well, we're trying to manipulate this belief.
I don't know how you control such a thing. You look at it another way.
Well, one of the things that happens, I think, is that there's a process of change. That's the danger of doing an experiment like this. As we begin to yield better and better results or worse and worse results, you know, both of us will change. And we'll change in the process of doing the work. You know, my experience has been, I see myself as an open-minded skeptic, and that may surprise some of my friends here, but I think that, you know, there's a lot of nonsense out there. And I am very clear to try and discriminate, you know. And yet, I think that from the data, I mean, if somebody can show me how these procedures are flawed, I'm happy to hear it. But I think that from the data, my conviction is that there's some kind of effect happening here. And I think that, you know, it's just a matter of time, and a few bamboo shoots up the nails, and, you know, we'll have them convinced, no problem.
I'm open to bribery as well.
Thank you. I'm Philip Cattell. It's not so much a question, just a couple of words on the experimentation on prayer that you mentioned. Now, I'm not sure if this is Larry Doss's work. I remember coming across it, I think, in one of Deepak Chopra's books. They did some experiments with prayer, but they had three separate groups. There were the Heelys who weren't prayed for, those who were prayed for in the manner of, please send these people healing. And then there was another group, and the prayer consisted of, well, dear God, if it's your will that they be healed, may they be healed. And that group was significantly different to the second group.
Right.
So, what I get the feeling of there is that the intention and the integrity of the person doing the praying and the healing is of paramount importance, and also that you can't insert your own rational mind in the way. And I found that personally with my own work. If I try and direct a rational thought, it has absolutely no effect at all. Whereas if I sort of subconsciously shrug my shoulders and say, well, you know, I don't know if you want to do something, God, go ahead and do it, then it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, several things there. I'm familiar with that. I think Larry does talk about it in his book. Larry's not a researcher, he's a writer, just like Deepak now is writing rather than doing research, but I think it's probably in both of their books. And the first point, more research needs to be done. We can't make any conclusions about mentation or intentionality strategies without more data, lots more data. That would be my first point. second point is there's different layers of intentionality, and I think that, when we think about consciousness, we think about intentionality. I'm certainly ready to take on unconscious processes as well as conscious ones, and I think that those are in some ways slipperier and trickier. I mean, the whole thing is muddled, but that, in some ways that's a little more complicated. But you look at something like David McClelland's work at Harvard, where he was interested in the unconscious intentions of people. So he asked, it was some of the early PNI work, where he was measuring immunoglobulin levels in the saliva, and he asked people whether they wanted to be healed or not. And they said, yes, of course, right? Well, then he did some projective assessments with them to look at their unconscious resistance. And in fact, what he found is that there were significant differences, and the group that, at a conscious level, said yes, but unconsciously were resisting, were not being affected by the visualization strategy. So I mean, there are different tiers and levels, and that's one of the really interesting challenges that I think that faces us. And again, why I think a multidisciplinary approach is important, because we really do need to team together and really try to figure out in a systematic way, how to begin to grapple with some of these questions. Thank you.
Okay.
You're going to get your exercise.
I'm afraid I'm somewhat deaf, and if I ask you something which I've already said, please pardon me. But you spoke about intuitive diagnosis. There are two kinds of it, isn't it? Where somebody spontaneously can tell you, you're suffering from cancer in the breast, and the other kind of people who are alleged to be trained clairvoyants, who have X-ray eyes and can tell you by looking at what's called the vital body or the double or whatever it is, do that. Now it seems that this can take place either way, but when they do, it's sporadic, and one of the reasons that skeptics become more skeptical is that those who claim that anyway to be trained clairvoyants cannot repeat their performances. And so it's as well to say that this technique is still so much in its infancy that a breakthrough has not taken place, and therefore it is still not strictly scientific. Because anything that is scientific, it seems to me, I've not got scientific training, but it's something that has to be repeated or can be repeated endlessly.
Well, I think you're right. I don't think any breakthrough has happened yet, and maybe it's imminent. I think that there are procedures, and I think certainly if you look at the Gonsalves data, for example, the ESP data, that there is replicability in that. It's not 100% replicable, but neither is, a creative flash. We can get into discussions about what creativity is, but there are many aspects of our consciousness that are not 100% reproducible. They are situation dependent, depression. I don't feel sad now. So there are aspects of our subjectivity that are not repeatable. However, I would argue that relative to a lot of psychology, these data appear very promising. And it hasn't been translated over into the intuitive diagnosis field. And that is absolutely right. What I said was that there are no good studies of intuitive diagnosis. Not that we've had a breakthrough. We are not even at the beginning of this process. And that right now we're trying, the challenge really is to come up with good procedures that will allow us to learn from some of the more solid data, like in the Gonsalves and the ESP research, and to then translate that into a framework that has the potential of, practical application within the context of healing. So, I agree with you completely, and I do believe that also there's the possibility of a breakthrough. I wouldn't really be doing this.
Donald Holmes. When I saw your cartoon of the rather blobby genie coming out of the Florence flask in the water, I was reminded of something that I've been reading recently in a study of Western esotericism, making reference to not so much intuition, as we now understand it, but imagination. But of course, many of the things that you've attempted through experimentation could also be said to entail imagination, the imagining of an image to transmit it, and so on. But in the studies of Western esotericism, leaving aside the more exotic cultures most people seem to be attracted to, imagination is coupled with mediation. That it was not a matter of, the person about to say a prayer, or to wish someone well, or even indeed wish someone ill, trying to operate directly upon the mind of another, but really making an appeal to a being beyond him or herself. Now the trouble is, you see, we carry on these experiments using not only the language, but the conceptual apparatus of largely a Cartesian cosmos. And the people outside our culture have a cosmos still, as was the case here before the 17th century, people with other beings to which appeal could be made for beneficent or malevolent purposes. And it seems to me that some of this research work is doomed by the very fact that it doesn't really entail what traditionally has been considered to be necessary. However, you may have received that. I mean, your cartoon reminded me that blobby figures such as genies, for example, in a more esoteric, a more exotic culture, did, as genies, I think that's how you pronounce it, play a considerable role in these matters.
Well, there's all the stuff that doesn't go into the technical report, but I think that I agree with you. I think, personally, I believe in a fairly enchanted universe. I think there's lots of things going on, and whenever I do an experiment, I'm aware of the social context, I'm aware of the interaction between people, I'm aware of the timing. I think that it's appropriate to start an experiment at a certain time. And there is a point usually when I do appeal to some higher authority, like, let's make this work, and that doesn't go in the technical reports. Why? Well, maybe in the next few years we'll start incorporating more of that. Harry Collins talks about two kinds of replication, the logarithmical and the enculturational. And a logarithmical is basically formulaic. And you put down in a technical report, I did this, that, and the other thing, and it's the details, it's the recipe. What doesn't get communicated are the tacit aspects of running an experiment. And he provides a number of different examples, including building a T-laser, something that you would think would be very easy to describe in formulaic terms and recipe terms, but in fact wasn't replicable until an investigator wanting to replicate went to the laboratory of the original researcher to see what some of the subtleties were that were going on. And I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where, especially in an area like this, where there are so many undefined variables, I don't think we're going to be able to get to a point where we can describe all of those variables with the detail that we'd like to, but that in fact it requires the kind of collaboration that we're trying to develop, where we work together and we spend time in the lab and we talk and and we challenge each other and we're playful. I mean, I think there's the key to all of it to me is a playful attitude and not taking any of it too seriously.
Okay, sorry.
My name's Alan Combs, and I was an experimental psychologist in a previous lifetime. And I want to address that question in a slightly different way, or comment, and that is that we have many voices, we have many people approaching these questions from different directions. But as a culture, this is what we're good at. And so it's like, there are certain things that can only be said perhaps best in poetry, best in painting, and yet we have articulate language that we can use in a more scientific way. So I think all these things need to move forward at once, and though there are perhaps flaws in the very heart of things, which is what the talk last night was about, that this is something that we are good at, and we should have it.
What is Miss Steele? You talked about many levels, many levels just now.
and we're also talking about a new language, science and exploration. I would say we already have the language, but we don't actually listen to what people say. And the subject of metaphor came up last night. Many religions talk about the word made flesh. And when you actually take a metaphor literally, you can find how the energy changes and moves in the person and the body. I'll give an example of the understanding of words. Love. I love having coffee right now, or I love my husband, which is a different thing. People make love, but they also have sex and call that making love. So a very simple word can have many levels of understanding. We had Myers-Briggs mentioned, and the Enneagram is another approach, and the Ray types are another approach, and the racial approach to different meanings of words. We have a synchronicity at the moment of everything coming together on many levels. You don't need a new language. You actually need to listen to what is already existing. You mentioned Larissa Nanskaya, who's a very potent psychic and a very beautiful lady. And you had Olga Worrell before her, who's done all of these sorts of experiments, and yet science is still not ready to accept because it can't be proven in their language. And there are many people here who can tell you that they can do many of the things mentioned, but no one will hear them because it isn't currently provable by existing methods. When are we going to listen? And thank you, by the way, because you're great.
Well, I'm listening. I hear what you're saying, and I also think that one of the challenges is to learn to develop more appropriate ways, both more appropriate questions to ask and more appropriate ways to ask them. And that's why when I start talking about methodology, that's what I mean. And I think that we need a broad definition of science. It's, science with a big S, so that it's all encompassing. And we have much to learn from taking the poetic, literary turn as well. I mean, I studied hermeneutics, I studied some of the, the postmodern philosophies, and I think that it's very important that we recognize the kinds of language, the kind of metaphor. One of the problems we run into is this energy metaphor. People are kind of saying, I had it on my slide, subtle energy, that came from a talk I did not too long ago at the Society of Subtle Energies. But I don't think it's energetic at all, at least not in the framework that we currently understand it. Information is probably a better term, but that we don't understand either. So, we're at a loss for appropriate metaphors to use to explain these kind of things. You mentioned love. One of the projects that we've got going at the Institute, I love this study. It's in its infancy, but we're working with an epidemiologist from the University of Virginia. His name is Jeff Levin. And he's interested in looking at the health effects of religiosity. So he's done a lot of epidemiological work looking at people who've had religious experiences or are participants in some kind of religious practice. And he's found that these people are, on average, and we're talking statistically here, epidemiology, but are much healthier overall. Less frequent visits to doctor, fewer medications taken, and so on. And he was very intrigued by this, and he's gotten lots of grants through the National Institutes of Health, and he's being taken very seriously for his work. So he ran into the work of the sociologist Sorokin, and he started thinking about Sorokin's work on love and altruism, altruistic love. And he started thinking about people who are religious or spiritual. And frequently there's this, and maybe this goes back to your point in a way, but going to people who give to others in a loving way. And so now what he's doing, we're doing a project to help him develop an instrument. And granted, this is very complex, this is very much at its beginning stages, but an instrument to measure altruistic love, and then to try and use his epidemiological methods to explore the health benefits of this kind of attitude or emotion. And what I like about the study is it's I like to play with the idea of epidemiology and creating an epidemic of love. And the whole idea for me is paradigmatic, because if you could show that giving love to other people has health benefits for yourself, then it may no longer be altruism, but it certainly would promote a lot more social responsibility for people. And I think that these are the kinds of projects that have great potential and promise. As we begin to grapple with some of these intangible aspects of human experience, married with very rigorous thinking. People who are, Jeff Levin is a very solid researcher, and asking the hard question and showing the social relevance. And if we can kind of couple those things together, or marry those things together, I think that science will, again be seen as socially relevant, and will begin to move the whole paradigm forward.
Okay, we're just about out of time, so it just remains to thank Marilyn for a very interesting talk. We're mainly, and in many of the other scientific talks, we're mainly taking a third-person perspective, looking in from the outside. And what we will be experiencing in this session with Anne, I think, is looking from the inside out, or, if you like, from the inside in. Because her latest book is called The Mystic Vision, with Andrew Harvey, and you'll maybe have seen it outside. And Anne has an extensive both experience of this, and she's read extremely widely in looking at these inner processes and their development. You'll see from the program that she is a Jungian analyst, and that she's the co-author with Jules Castrow of The Myth of the Goddess, and a wonderful children's book called The Birds Who Flew Beyond Time, which uses some of the images, paintings of Bettis Blacker, who was talking in the last talk. So I think it makes rather a nice transition from one to the other. And Anne's talk is entitled Sleeping Beauty, the Awakening of Instinct into Consciousness. So that she'll be talking about how these inner processes evolve and develop, and how they are related to the problems and issues that we've been talking about, which we face as a culture. So Anne, I'm very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy and privileged to be here in this marvellous college, which somehow summarizes to me the whole of Western civilization and what we have built up over the last 5,000 years, and which is so infinitely precious. I'd like to ask you to send me your love, because I'm sure if you do, I'll give a much better talk. And as I've spent my whole life trying to get away from Occam's razor, love would be a very nice antidote to that. So I'm just going to start the first slide. Anything happening up there? There's nothing. Seems to be. Oh no, that's sorry. Something's gone wrong, I'm afraid. No. Experience I had when I was 11 of leaving the body, and it happened totally out of the blue. I knew nothing about that sort of thing, and I was lying on my bed after lunch having a kind of snooze, and suddenly I felt the bed open underneath me, and I was pushed through, and it closed over the top of me, and I found myself going through a long tunnel with a tremendous roaring noise like an avalanche or a waterfall, which absolutely terrified me. And suddenly I came out the other end of that tunnel into total silence and peace, and I heard a voice saying to me, "I am," and it was going to say something else, but my terror cut it short, unfortunately, and I went back into my body without ever hearing what the rest of the sentence might have been. Now, as you can imagine, this set the trajectory of my life in terms of trying to find out what that voice was, what that experience meant, and eventually what consciousness was. And so that experience when I was 11 has brought me to this conference. And my whole life has really has evolved out of that early experience, which of course I now understand as a shamanic one. And I have stayed, I'm coming to this talk from the other point of view, as David said, from the inner perspective, almost from the point of view of the ground of being, as I call it, as consciousness as the ground, trying to reach us through all the different consciousnesses that we are, trying to make us aware of itself. So I've chosen this first slide of ourselves really coming from the basis of the consciousness we know, putting our heads through the barrier, through the space-time barrier, and looking into another dimension, or perhaps many other dimensions. And I think we are, psychically speaking, where the Portuguese explorers were in the 15th century. That is to say, we're moving from a flat earth image of reality to a round earth image. And that came to me because I went to Oxford, and the first essay I had to write was what was the objective of the Portuguese explorers as they set off to go around the world. So here we are, an image of exploration, an image of breaking through, an image of quest. And as I was preparing this talk, I came across a sentence in a book by Bede Griffiths called Return to the Centre. And this is what he wrote. The evolution of matter from the beginning leads to the evolution of consciousness in man. It is the universe itself which becomes conscious in man. It is the inner movement of the spirit, immanent in nature, which brings about the evolution of matter and life into consciousness. I'm going to repeat that last bit. It is the inner movement of the spirit, immanent in nature, which brings about the evolution of matter and life into consciousness. Now, I find this immensely exciting because it revolutionizes our view of nature and of spirit. And I believe that this understanding, so beautifully put by him, is the basis of the new paradigm that is coming into being. Consciousness seems to be like a plant, an organic growth which has its roots in an unknown depth, and its flowering is a potential within us, a potential that we have still to experience, and that only a few pioneers of consciousness have experienced. As Thetis's interview with Peter showed, that experience which he had is a foretaste of what we will all experience one day. So as we evolve, so we become intelligible to ourselves. And as we grow, so we experience the nature of reality. I'd just like to ask you, am I going too fast, and can you hear me well? Okay. So the great question in my mind for about the last 20 years has been, where did our present dualistic view of reality originate? Where did we split spirit and nature into two polarities? I believe it has been formed by two powerful myths, which I shall come to in a moment. Because of their profound influence on Western civilization, we have come to divide what we call life or reality into two aspects, spirit and nature, mind and matter. As I hope to show in this talk, these are arbitrary divisions, which have arisen because of an evolutionary experience of separation from nature, which has been a painful but necessary phase of our evolution. Partly because of the experience of separation, and partly because of the accelerated development of the mind in the last 5,000 years, human consciousness has also come to be divided in two, into mind and soul, head and heart. And we are now virtually unconscious of our soul. It is almost impossible to speak to each other as people once spoke to each other in the past, because of our fear of appearing non-rational. A part of ourselves is almost autistic or speechless. Today we live in our head, in our mind, in what we believe is the conscious, most interesting and powerful part of ourselves. Nature, soul and heart, the whole realm of the non-rational, have somehow been left out of the question. Yet I believe that in the story of the Sleeping Beauty, the prince and the Sleeping Beauty symbolize these two aspects of our consciousness which belong together as bridegroom and bride. This is a beautiful painting by Burne-Jones which conveys the feeling, I think, of the soul.